So, first of all, do you know what a factor model is?
No.
Have you got any
Factor?
insight? Yes, have you got any insight about principal component analysis?
Yeah, I have a factor discriminant analysis,
Yes.
principal component analysis. I have idea about it.
All right.
I want to use it long time factor analysis for this one, what they call financial analysis for bankruptcy. Like
All
what
right.
is the likelihood of a company going bankrupt, something like that.
All right. What about the others?
Yes, I have also knowledge about the principal component analysis and other analysis related to factor analysis.
All right, great.
Oh, no, I do not have any knowledge about it.
All right. So let's make a quick recap about what a principal component analysis is. So let's say that you got a bunch of data. So in which you got, for example, observations in rows and variables in columns, right? So the principal component analysis somehow try to figure out if there is a common path among those observation and variables. And we can do this using a decomposition made by eigenvalues and correspondent eigenvectors. So that basically the actual, so the eigenvector works as the vector that can synthesize at least part of the variance of the panel. So let's say that, for example, we figure out that we need 3 components to collect a decent amount of variance coming from our panel. We will decompose this using principal component analysis over those 3 components. So we set up the number of eigenvalues to find out equal to 3, and we will compute the corresponding 3 eigenvectors to recognize those 3 patterns. And basically, it is not really different. So we got from what we do using an OLS, but in the ordinary least squares, we only have one regression line that's supposed to capture all the variance coming from the data. In this case, we need to figure out how many vectors, in this case, eigenvectors, we need to set up in order to collect a decent amount of variance throughout the panel. Does it make sense to you, Michelle?
A little bit. I will follow.
All right. So this is the main idea. So the main idea of the principal component analysis is this. So it is to represent the whole panel using a limited number, so very, very huge panel eventually, with a limited number of eigenvalues and eigenvector, with a limited number of factors. That's the point. Following from this, we can bring all this framework into something that it is a bit more useful for us. So to some framework which is more adapt to time series analysis, namely dynamic factor models. So you can see by yourself that the increasing size and the complexities of the database, so that the amount of data that increasing over time just makes this just call us to adopt some tool which is more sophisticated and more adapt to deal with this increased amount of data. The dynamic factor model is perfect for working with time series. So basically we will adapt we will do some factor analysis to a time series so that the actual factor that we will compute is an actual representation of a time series. And this makes this more adapt in order to work with microeconomic time series. We can represent those factors as a bar by itself. And since we can use these factors as a bar, we can make up a structure over those different factors, so over the bar constituted by those factors, in order to implement a structural bars, or more properly, a structural dynamic factor model. And once we do this, we can use the structural dynamic factor model to do both. Bringing model to data, so to check out the dynamic of a DSGE model using a structural DFM, or we can enlarge, so we can implement, we can bring model to data with some particular sector. For example, and this is the first and most common example. Let's say, for example, that we got a DSGE model operating as a small open economy. So we got some international market going on. However, this international market represents the rest of the world, so something that it is impossible to estimate. Standard technique, for example, if you take Cristiano et al. 2011, they used to simulate the international market using a structural VAR framework. So they impose a structural VAR inside of a DSGE model. However, the rest of the world is just totally synthetic. Using dynamic factor model, we can bring model to data in that specific sector. So we can extract some estimated variables to plug in the variables of the rest of the world. And this is, for example, this is an example of a factor augmented bar. So we got a bar in which we...
Is the slide moving?
Oh, no.
Okay, because I'm seeing the same slide. I don't know, maybe the slide is not moving or just on my side.
No, it's not moving. So
Ah,
I'm
okay.
moving right now. Sorry about it. So as we said, we can implement the factor part along a bar model to bring more information to our model. So, and this model may be a DSGE, maybe just a bar model, maybe whatever you want. However, we're just collecting a huge amount of data, a huge amount of time series. We'll represent those time series with some specific factors, and we can use those all along with a DSGE model or a proper bar model or something like this, or to estimate a proper structural bar model, proper structural bar, structural DFM model, to do whatever we used to do with a structural bar, basically. For example, we can use DFM to do forecasting, to estimate impulse response function, or to do nowcasting. So far, so good?
Yeah.
All right. So the first estimate, the first formulation of the dynamic factor model comes from Stock and Watson. The seminar paper is from 1989. and however they work for over those stuff for like 15 years or so. And however, this is a strongly parametric framework in which, you know, there are some features that we will see later on with that this parametric version, which is kind of stuck, we call it static. However, from 2000 to today, actually, we got a generalized form of DFM coming from Lippi. And Lippi is the main expert of this field. He worked with several researchers, for example, Forni, Reiklin, or Zaffaroni, for example, and they implemented a non-parametric version of DFM. So they added an additional step of estimation in order to make a representation which is more adherent to reality and better performing. So we're gonna see an outlook about both version of DFM. Then I think today or possibly tomorrow we're gonna see some code for the Lippi version of this. And as I said, we're gonna use the Lippi version of this because it is the better performing one. And this version from Lippi is non-parametric, and we can recognize this as a fully dynamic representation. Now, the DFM, once we apply some factor decomposition over a large panel of time series, we can identify some common component, which is the actual component that will represent our time series, and which are the component that we're gonna use at the end of the day. And we're gonna identify some part of this panel that we cannot really collect, that we call it idiosyncratic.